Hello, and welcome to a brand new day of free-to-play here on Magic the Gathering Arena. Get the dish on the latest with me, Lord Rumfish. We are looking at green from Fallen Empires Remastered. If you haven't heard the news, Fallen Empires Remastered is coming to Arena. It's going to affect all of the formats: Historic, Timeless, Brawl, and, yes, Standard. If you missed it, I've got my top 10 Standard cards from Fallen Empires Remastered. I've also got a video about the set mechanics and the series of videos about the limited format. There's going to be sealed and draft. So, let's hop right in. Elven Fortress is a common green enchantment, 1 green, and has an activated ability of green and a colorless. Target blocking creature gets +0/+1 until end of turn. So, this is mana intensive. It also does not save your creatures from pingers. Now, if you are drafting in real life, in a pod, then you might be the only green player in the pod. So you might not have to watch out for Thorn Thalids. But whoever's playing white has access to Ication Javelineer. And the white player can be a real thorn in your side. So, Elven Fortress, I think a one-of copy of this does help fortify you, messes up combat math, and green does want to play a long game. So making your blockers better does fuel that long game for green. I think the first copy of this card is like, I don't know, let's call it a 2.5. I think one copy of this is almost always worth playing, and obviously 2 or more of them has no further effect. So, you don't have to pick it highly. They'll probably come around late. All you really need is like 1. Next up is Elvish Farmer. This is a rare for green and a colorless. We have a 0/2 elf. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a spore counter on him, and you can remove 3 spore counters to create a 1/1 green sapperling. He can also sacrifice a sapperling, and you gain 2 life. So this is a pretty good card. It doesn't just die to a pinger. That's nice. If you pair it up with like Elven Fortress, then it's a pretty solid blocker too. And it does what you want it to do in this deck. It gives you extra outlets for sapperlings, and it creates sapperlings. You cannot actually target the Elvish Farmer with Fungal Bloom, because the Elvish Farmer is not a fungus, it's an elf. But in green, you're going to have so many Thalids in the deck anyway, that you're going to find targets for Fungal Bloom. Despite not having that synergy, I think the Elvish Farmer is a pretty high pick for green. I think you would run as many of these as you get. So I would call this card like a 3.5. You know, nothing about it just screams a bomb exactly. But the 2 toughness and playing into, you know, the overall theme of the set with the Thalid deck makes this like a surefire include. It's one of the better cards you can take. Alright, next up we have Elvish Hunter. This is a common. It is a 1/1 for a green and a colorless. It has the activated ability, green and a colorless, and tap. Target creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. So this would be a neat ability if it weren't for the fact that this is a 1/1 for 2. Now, if your opponent does not have pingers, you know, if your opponent's playing a blue deck, something like that, then yeah, you can absolutely put the Elvish Hunters to work. And you can keep their big stuff locked down. Still, even in that matchup, the blue deck's eventually going to get a Homeward Spawning Bed and just make a bunch of 1/1s. So, I really don't know that this card has a great purpose. maybe it would be okay against a black player who doesn't have access to pingers. Um, there are some of the threats in black that keeping them tapped down would probably be pretty good. So this card's pretty weak overall. One of the things to know about this format is green, in order to survive, especially a start from white, which has the Pingers and Feral Zealot, or the Feralite Mantle. In order to survive that start, you need to get bodies on the board. Now, you'd probably rather have Thallid, or even Elvish Scout, than Elvish Hunter. But you need things out that you can block with, and then cast a Spore Cloud. We'll go look at Spore Cloud later. Even though these are 1 toughness things, and you don't rate them very highly, you still probably run some in your deck, because you've got to be able to block and stop Feral Zealot, or something with the aura, and then cast a Spore Cloud and keep it tapped down for a turn and make a tempo play. The green deck just needs time. And that means maybe running some of these suboptimal creatures just so you have something to play early in the game. Green could get a lot of benefit out of taking a second color, where it gets access to like 1/2s for 2, like from blue, for example. Things that it doesn't mind committing to the board and then like blocking and trading in combat. Because green's creatures are a little bit more precious. You'd rather give them time to build up their spore counters to give you a long game. So it's sorely lacking in quality early drops that can get into combat safely. So Elvish Hunter, since you just need warm bodies sometimes, I'm going to give this thing like a 1.5, but still, it's bad. Elvish Scout. So it's a 1/1 for 1 green, common, Elf Scout. You can pay a green and untap target attacking creature you control. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to and dealt by it this turn. If anyone remembers the Gust Cloak creatures from, when was that, Legions? Something like that. They've got this ability. So this is an interesting ability to be able to attack in if the opponent's got like tricks or makes blocks or things you don't expect. Or just to make a go wide attack and save something that the opponent, it's like an on-board block, but you can still just pull it out of combat. It's interesting. It's still just a 1 toughness creature, so it dies too easily. But again, you've got to get on the board in order to be able to stop the white creatures from just coming in and killing your stuff. So you gotta play some things like the Elvish Scout, or even the Elvish Hunter, and then once you get to 3 mana, you can block and you can cast a Spore Cloud. Gain some tempo that way. So this card is not good. Again, this is probably around like a 1.5, but one way or another, you need warm bodies. Feral Thallid. This one's interesting. It's an uncommon. It costs 3 green and 3 colorless. You get a 6/3 fungus. At the beginning of your upkeep, it gets a spore counter. You can remove 3 spore counters from this to regenerate it. And just, going over regeneration again, you remove all damage from it, you remove it from combat, prevent the next destroy effect against it, and it taps. So, this creature can protect itself. It is bigger than most of the creatures in this format. And when you get to the point of being able to regenerate it, which is easier to do when you get Fungal Bloom down here, then you could pretty effectively be crashing in with this Feral Thallid and using it in combat to your heart's content. Especially if you can be putting extra spore counters on it. So this is a great late game for green. Green's got a pretty good late game anyway because it's just ticking up value constantly all the time with the thalids. But this is a good body to actually get into combat with the opponent's nastiest things and potentially win. So there's only so many 6-drops you can run in a deck, but still I'm going to give this a 3. I'd rate it more highly except for the triple green. It's really not very splashable with the triple green and its mana cost. So I think it always makes the cut. I think it's very good. It's just a question of how many 6-drops you can run in this format, because this format's pretty low and aggressive. Still, the Feral Thallid is a good card. Next up, we've got Fungal Bloom. This is a 2-green enchantment. It's a rare. It has the activated ability, pay 2 green, put a spore counter on target fungus. So, the mono-green mana requirement is intense on this card. So it is not splashable. This card is so good if you're in green, though, that as long as green is one of your primary colors and you've got a good critical mass of thalids in the deck, I would probably run this even in a 2-color deck, even if it means you can only put like 1 spore counter on per turn. Obviously, in a mono-green deck, it kicks up to an amazing level, where you can start doing some silly things, like creating a fog effect every turn, regenerating the Feral Thallid every turn, putting out a 1 or more Saprolings every turn, machine gunning stuff down with Thorn Thallid. So this card is a linchpin. I think in green, I would go so far as to call it a bomb. And even with the mana-intensive nature of this card, I'm going to rate it a 4. As far as what green is trying to do and how green is trying to win, you definitely want this card. It's so important to the deck that even though it has no function in multiples, I would probably run more than one just to increase the odds that I will draw it. That's how highly I think of this card in green. So yeah, green is kind of a middling color in Fallen Empires, kind of falls in the middle of the pack. Cards like this one can make it a game that the opponent can't win if they don't have pingers for something like your Spore Flower. Night Soil. This is a common enchantment, 2 green. Activated ability of 1 colorless, generic. Exile 2 creature cards from a single graveyard, create a 1/1 green Saproling creature token. So, Fallen Empires has a lot of these kind of enchantments where they don't really do anything in multiples, but the first copy's pretty good. Night Soil is one of those. And this is more of a late game card, so green in Fallen Empires is slow. It's a slow, plodding, methodical color. It can have trouble with the early starts from white and black. And there are creatures that want to get in and pick off your creatures and make you discard cards and all of that. If you get into a longer game, Night Soil can take not just your creatures, but the opponent's creatures that have piled into the graveyard over the course of the game and give you added value. So by the time you've made like 2 Saprolings with this card, you've gotten pretty good value from it. If you go higher than that, you're probably getting really good value from this. There is a potential Reanimator deck. It's hard to pull off, but blue-black can try to use Soul Exchange to reanimate a deep spawn. Night Soil could trip up that plan. So it's actually a counterplay to that deep spawn reanimator archetype in Fallen Empires. But note that it's not up to 2 creature cards. So if they've only got one deep spawn in the graveyard, Night Soil can't stop it. There's got to be at least 2 targets. Overall, I think this card's about a 2.5. I think if you had an amazing green deck, on rare occasion this might not make the cut, but most of the time just for the late game value, you probably do run 1 copy of this, no more than 1 for sure. Alright, Spore Cloud. This is key in green to trying to survive the early game. So this is a common. It's 2 green and 1 colorless. It's an instant. Tap all blocking creatures. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. Each attacking creature and each blocking creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. So, obviously you would prefer just to not block. Just, just prevent the combat damage and tap down their stuff and not tap down your stuff. However, white and black have some creatures that, if they're unblocked, they can prevent their combat damage to do a special effect, and Spore Cloud wouldn't stop that. So you actually need to combine Spore Cloud with a blocking creature, which unfortunately will tap down your blocker. But in exchange, you get to blunt the offense of the early aggression from white and black with their Nekrites, their Mindstab Thralls, their Feral Zealot, Feralite Mantle, all of that stuff. You've really got to find a way early in the game to survive that initial onslaught, and not just let them pick off your creatures for the rest of the game. Spore Cloud is a way you can do that. So, I think this card always makes the cut. There's probably an upper limit on how many you run eventually, but I'm going to give this card a 3. It's so necessary against some of the best colors in the format that I think you do need multiples of this card, probably. How many, I'm not sure, but all of your other stuff that you're playing is going to give you an end game. It's going to give you a long game. You've just got to survive to get there. Spore Flower. This is an uncommon. 2 green for a 0/1 fungus. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a spore counter on this. You can remove 3 spore counters from Spore Flower and prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. So, unfortunately, this has 1 toughness, and that does mean it dies to opposing pingers, Icacian Javelineers, and such. So one of the things you might do with a Spore Flower is try to bait the opponent out with other little 1-drops that are, and 2-drops that are less meaningful, that have 1 toughness. You play some Thalids, you play some, Elvish Scouts and whatnot. You try to get those pinged dead by the Icacian Javelineer so that your Spore Flower can live. Because if the Spore Flower lives, and you combine Spore Flower with Fungal Bloom, then Spore Flower is going to gain a counter on your upkeep. You can pay 4 green to add 2 more, and you have a fog every turn for the rest of the game. So you need to watch out for opposing Icacian Javelineers. You need to watch out for opposing Thorn Thalids. And the red deck, unless they're trying to go face with all of their Goblin Grenades, red deck might just choose to sacrifice a Goblin and blow up the Spore Flower with a Goblin Grenade. That's how much this card changes the game when it's on the field. Even just ticking up fairly without putting extra spore counters on it, getting access to a fog once every 3 turns could be backbreaking to what the opponent's trying to do. So, trying to keep this card alive is a big deal. And there are some ways in colorless that can help you out as well. There's like a card that can pump a creature +2/+2. You might hold that artifact just to save the Spore Flower from a pinger. As far as how highly I rate this card, even with the 1 toughness, it can change the game so dramatically, especially against some colors that have trouble removing it. I think I give this a 3.5. It's just you really gotta dance a clever dance to find a way to keep this alive. Next up we have the iconic Thallid. There's a 1/1 for 1 green. At the beginning of your upkeep, get a spore counter. Remove 3 spore counters, get a 1/1 Saproling. So, this card just kind of exemplifies what green is trying to do in this format. Instead of trying to beat down early, it's trying to go long. It's trying to gain a ton of value over a very long game. Thallid unfortunately dies to the pingers of the format. However, it synergizes nicely with the other enchantments, the other Thallids, things that care about Saprolings. So, rather than the elves, which I rated as like 1.5s, Thallid, I think, is about a 2.5. You know, you gotta get bodies down on the field if to be able to block and do the Spore Cloud trick. You'd probably rather have Thallids in your deck than those elves. You can play the elves early to bait out the pingers and stuff. If you're against a color combination that doesn't have pingers, though, then yeah, you can play out the Thallids and just start moving glacially towards your long game. Thallid Devourer. This is an uncommon. It is a 2/2 fungus for 2 green and a colorless. At the beginning of your upkeep, it gets a spore counter. You can remove 3 spore counters for a 1/1 Saproling. And you can sacrifice a Saproling to give this thing +1/+2 until end of turn. If Thallid Devourer had Trample, it could probably really end some games. As it is, it's a piece that can work to break a board stalemate. Not only is it building up towards your, slow, go wide strategy with a bunch of Saprolings, but the Devourer can attack in or block and pump itself up and safely get through combat. So this is easily one of the best cards you're going to be putting in your deck in green. I would give it like a 3.5. In a pinch, you can use this to trade with like a Feral Zealot or a Necrite or something, because they were probably going to kill the Thallid Devourer anyway. You might as well force the issue and not give them the choice. Obviously, you would rather not lose the Thallid Devourer. You would rather keep it around, keep it into the late game, be able to pump it up and all of that. But at the end of the day, sometimes you need a 2/2 for 3. And this serves all of those roles beautifully. So, yeah, 3.5. Thelonite Druid. This is a uncommon human cleric druid. It's a 1/1 for 3. And you can pay a green and 1, tap, sacrifice a creature, which could be like a Saproling or whatever. Forests you control become 2/3 creatures until end of turn. They're still lands. So Thelonite Druid is incredibly slow. You want a high count of forests before you ever think about activating his ability. You also want excess creatures that you don't mind sacrificing, which you get in the late game. On top of that, Thelonite Druid is a 1/1 for 3, and it's a terrible body. In terms of like facing opposing pingers, or even just getting into regular combat. So again, this is another late game card. Green is so deeply invested in the late game in Fallen Empires, and Fallen Empires is a pretty fast format. So Thelonite Druid I think is pretty bad because of the speed of the format and how much getting onto the board matters against white and black in particular. So I can't rate this more than like, I think I'm gonna give this a 1. It's pretty awful. That's not to say that you couldn't save this card, hold it in your hand, you know, just sit on it for a long time, wait until the pingers are kind of exhausted, and then play this, and the next turn, sack or saproling, animate all your forests, try to go in for an alpha strike. But I don't think it's a great plan. I don't think it's a great card. I think most of the time you're not going to put it in your deck. Selenite Monk. This is a rare. It is a 1/2 for 2 green, 2 colorless. Creature Insect Monk Cleric. So is this thing like a Nantuko? It has the ability tap, sacrifice a green creature, target land becomes a forest. Forever, not until end of turn. So there's a couple of things you can do with the Thelanite Monk. You can gradually turn your own lands into forests, so the Thelanite Druid can animate them. You could turn the opponent's lands into forests to gradually color screw them. You know, you can't mana screw them, but you could start removing the colored mana sources that they need over the course of the game. Most of the time, I think the format's going to be too fast for that to matter. Plus, you have to sack a green creature every time you do this. In terms of the body, it's very forgettable. You know, a 1/2 for 2 mana is great because you can get it down early and get into combat and it survives pingers. A 1/2 for 4 mana is so much slower. So it has really niche applications. At least it doesn't just die to a pinger. Now once it is on the board, it blocks relatively well and you don't really mind losing it. It's very forgettable, but it's a creature you don't mind getting into combat, and the 2 toughness is somewhat relevant. I guess I would call this card a 2, just because it's a body you can get down. It will probably stick, and you can throw it into combat. It has a little bit of niche application. It's really not very good. There's a lot of other things you would take higher than this card. Velen's Chant, it's an uncommon. 2 green and 1. Enchantment, at the beginning of your upkeep, you sacrifice this unless you pay 1 green. And whenever a player puts a swamp onto the battlefield, Velen's Chant deals 3 damage to that player unless they put a -1/-1 counter on a creature they control. This is a sideboard card. Yeah, you don't know if the opponent's going to have swamps, and you definitely don't want to commit this into your deck with an upkeep cost until you're sure that they are going to be playing swamps. So this is a 0.5. If you are up against a player with some black, this will trip them up a bit. Get some damage in, probably. If you're up against mono black, this would be pretty painful for them. Velen's Curse. This is a rare, 2 green, enchantment. Blue creatures don't untap during their controller's untap steps, and at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player may choose any number of tapped blue creatures and pay blue for each creature chosen this way. If they do, untap those creatures. So it taxes people for their blue creatures. To where they have to pay an extra blue to untap them. So, Thelen's Curse is actually pretty good against the blue player. One of the ways blue can try to win is going really wide with Camerid tokens. Now, obviously, they can choose not to be attacking with them. Right? They can just keep them up untapped until they feel that they have enough stuff to try to alpha strike. But getting down Thelen's Curse means you are maybe stopping them from chipping in some damage with like Deep Spawn or Homerid Warrior or something, because now you're taxing them extra mana to get in with those creatures. I'm not sure if it's amazing in that matchup, but it would be okay. It's certainly terrible in any other matchup. It's a 0.5. And Thorn Thallid. This is a common. 2 green, 1 colorless. It's a 2/2 fungus. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a spore counter on Thorn Thallid. Remove 3 spore counters from Thorn Thallid. It deals 1 damage to any target. So this is by far easily one of the best things you can put in your green deck. It pairs up amazingly with Fungal Bloom. If you're in mono green, at 4 mana, you can start pinging something every turn with the Thorn Thallid. If ping for 1 is not meaningful enough, you can save it up till next turn and deal 2 damage to any target. So, if you don't have the enchantment yet where you can put extra counters on it, Thorn Thallid's also a decent enough size of body that even though you'd prefer to keep it, just like the Thallid Devourer, you can get it into combat to block a Feral Zealot or whatever early, just because you have to, and it would have killed the Thorn Thallid anyway. And it's pretty good in that role as well. So, I think this card is, because you can put the damage wherever you want, I think this is even better than the Thallid Devourer. And I know it's just common, but pinging is so relevant in this format, and it's such a flexible way of trying to win the game later, that I think the Thorn Thallid is easily one of your best cards in green. I'd probably rate it as highly as a 4. It is right up there with the best things you can be doing in green. And that is a wrap for green in Fallen Empires. Join me next time for colorless and land. And there are some interesting effects down in colorless and land. Can really shake up how the game is played. So please like and subscribe. Check out my other videos. That helps the channel a lot. And until next time, never stop honing your critical thinking and empathy on this day of April the 1st.